I want to turn the focus to the state of Arizona, where a representative there has proposed legislation that could lead to even more racial profiling in the state. Republican State Representative Carl Seel from Arizona proposed legislation that would basically criminalize any undocumented immigrant who uses any type of public service. That includes public bathrooms, public roads, public schools, anything that is paid for by taxpayers in the state. Now, how would they enforce this legislation or this law should the legislation pass into law? It would basically allow officials and law enforcement to ask for documents or paperwork proving that that individual is a U.S. citizen. Now, of course, that's a little problematic considering the fact that this leads to racial profiling and giving cops the ability to stop someone just because they have dark skin. But there are also other issues at play here that I think the mainstream media has failed to address. Now, if you look back to the controversial law SB 1070 that passed a few years ago in Arizona, it would allow cops to ask for documentation proving that someone is a U.S. citizen if they get stopped for a traffic violation. Now, of course, that was controversial and people were really upset about it, but they failed to realize what was at play behind the scenes. NPR did this incredible investigation and they found that the reason why SB 1070 was even written up or authored in the first place was because there was an industry that stood to profit from criminalizing undocumented immigrants. Now, let me give you an example. Through NPR's analysis, they looked at campaign finance reports, lobbying documents, and corporate records. What they showed is a quiet, behind-the-scenes effort to help draft and pass Arizona Senate Bill 1070 by an industry that stands to benefit from it, the private prison industry. Okay? Their investigation also found the following. According to Corrections Corporation of America, which of course is one of the largest for-profit prisons in the United States, reports reviewed by NPR, executives believe immigrant detention is the next big market. Last year they wrote that they expect to bring in a significant portion of our revenues from Immigration and Customs Enforcement, the agency that detains illegal immigrants. Now think about that for a second. A representative in the state of Arizona had a meeting with ALEC and with Corrections Corporation of America and drafted SB 1070, which successfully passed. Now fast forward to a few years later, and we have another Republican who is proposing more legislation that would criminalize undocumented immigrants for using any public service. So that means that we are going to lock away more undocumented immigrants before deporting them. But does anyone realize how counterproductive that is? So for-profit prisons get paid by taxpayers, okay? We give them our money so they can lock people away, including nonviolent drug offenders and undocumented immigrants. If the real problem in the United States is that we have undocumented immigrants that are costing U.S. taxpayers a significant amount of money, then why the hell are we detaining them for years before we send them to the country that they're from, before we deport them? That is unbelievably counterproductive. So the reality is, in the state of Arizona, when these Republicans are proposing this type of legislation, it's not because they're really concerned about undocumented immigrants. They're really concerned about paying back for-profit prisons that have been funding their campaigns. That's what it really comes down to. Now, for the legislation that was recently proposed, the first offense for an undocumented immigrant would be a misdemeanor, but the second offense would indicate jail time for that person. So again, this is all about locking people away before deporting them. It's all about taking money from the government, putting it into the private prisons, and for some reason locking people away when we're making the argument that, hey, you know what, we shouldn't be spending any more money on them, we should deport them. Doesn't really make a lot of sense, does it?